Right. I'm here just to tell you a story. A designer and an accountant are in the Sumatran jungle on safari. When a tiger jumps out in front of them, the accountant quickly starts calculating the probability that he will be able to escape before the tiger pounces, by which time the tiger's upon him and he's dead. The designer instantly panics, throws his arms in the air, drops his rucksack, breaks his aftershave bottle, which the tiger doesn't like. The tiger retreats, the designer survives. Now, designers have roughly the same brains as accountants. The difference is not what you've got, but how you use it. The difference is all in the mind. Nowadays, we're taught that rational thinking and calculation are more desirable than emotion and creativity. Strange, really, because creativity looks forward to what might be and for purpose, and rational thinking looks backwards at what was and for causes. In today's world, our identities are often defined and demonstrated by what we buy into and by what we affiliate ourselves to. Brands, in the broadest sense, represent our choices and often define where we are in our life ladder. In order to understand what a brand does for us, we need to understand what a brand means for us. And in order to understand what a brand means for us, we need to understand how we create meaning. And in order to understand meaning, we need to understand what drives our desire to make meaning, why we create, why we change things, why we innovate, and why we need to understand how ours and other minds work. And in order to understand how minds work, we need to look into the mechanics of the brain, emotion, creativity, consciousness, what biases we have that color the way we see the world, what role our genes play, what role the environment plays. We need to understand why we do it, what drives us to create a design or a brand. I can tell you now, it's not money. From the other end, we need to understand what a brand delivers and what drives it and what it satisfies, why some brands deliver and some brands don't. So in order to understand why we create brands and designs, we need to understand who we are and where we are culturally in the grand scheme of things. And at the very core of this is emotion, consciousness, empathy, optimism, and a need to belong. We identify with and buy into brands or a design because they have stories that we want to believe, values that we value, and communities that we want to be part of. So there are two themes I want to follow today: the creative mind and brands, how they're connected by a fundamental human need. The design of a hotel, or anything really, is a strategy to deliver an experience the guest or the end user values and wants to be part of. Hotel design is driven by a need to satisfy an end user, usually the guest, and we'll see later what 3 criteria a designer has to meet to satisfy this need. However, the journey to that end is based on 2 fundamental things: the mind of the designer, the mind of the guest, and the relationship between the two. Creative thinking is the structure of cultural progression. Creative thinking changes our destiny. And the ability to plan a future is a fundamental human quality. Creatives learn to trust their so-called intuitions in what I'll call creative intelligence. A manipulation of the emotions and cultural sensibilities to plan a future event. Planned action is necessarily optimistic, and creative thinkers teach themselves, first consciously and then unconsciously, to optimize these tools. And what is that tool? A jelly-like blob of meat and blood which is kept in a black box with no light, with nothing but wires connecting it to the outside world, and we employ a bunch of unaccountable minion zombies to work it. The only access we have is via our conscious thinking, which is a blind CEO who arbitrates over argumentative minion zombies. I tend to think of it a bit like being the chief rabbi, but in Mecca. The Greeks pictured the mind as a charioteer pulled by horses trying to control them. And I'll demonstrate this with a simple game. What I'd like to do is just to say the color of the letters that you see. Ready? Yeah? Say the colors that you see of the letters. So, this is called the Stroop test, and it unmasks the clash between strong, involuntary, and automatic impulse to read the word and to say the colour by crossing over our automatic reactions with our thinking brain. It exposes some fundamental workings of the conflicts between analytical thinking and perception. If we think too much, we get confused and grind to a halt. If you ask a millipede which foot goes first, he will get so confused that he won't be able to move at all. Think of the mind as a parliament, with conflicting opinions, all pursuing the same end result, but with different ways to get there. Now, our brains are utterly alien to us, and yet somehow they are us. They define our identity. The neural patterns of each individual is the individual, and the neural paths determine each individual character. It's only 3% of our body weight, and yet it uses 20% of all our energy, 25% of all our oxygen, 70% of all the glucose we consume is used by the brain. 90% of what it does without our consent, and yet somehow it keeps us alive, moving, heart pumping, eating, loving, fearing, fighting, innovating, and creating. The brain runs the show. What you think of a conscious control is only the very smallest part of what it actually does. The 1.5 kilos of pinkish grey fleshy matter, with a consistency a bit like a boiled egg, is made up of about 100 billion cells called neurons. And these neurons are connected in literally a mind-boggling network, potentially 100 billion connections. And that's why you should positively never trust a cell, because they just make up everything. All sensory information is converted into electrochemical signals, traveling through potentially 100 billion connections. And all of this activity produces our sense of reality. Our bodies, our senses, in space and time, are the only way we have of acquiring knowledge and understanding the universe, our world, our cities, our societies, our friends, our loves, our hopes, our desires, our emotions, memories, our identity, and our vision of the future. But our sense of reality is limited to our biology. We perceive what we have evolved to perceive, but it's our environment that determines the inputs that arrive. Our psychology influences all our decisions. Our physiology, influences all our decisions. A survey of the Israeli parole board found that decisions were influenced by hunger. A prisoner was 3 times more likely to get parole after the parole board had had their lunch. And a Harvard study of lap dancers in Mexico, which is nice work if you can get it, found that dancers earned more when they were ovulating than when they were menstruating. So we are hijacked by our goal is about the emotional quality of a project, how it makes you feel. All purchasing decisions are based on desire and permission. How much do you want it, and what are your means? Will it change the way I feel? When the iPhone first came out, it tapped into our emotional needs. It felt good, it looked good, maybe even had the ability to give meaning to our lives. The practical, this is how something actually functions. Its behavior aspects, it's human-centered, and is demonstrated by what he calls design thinking. This too is a very powerful way to visualize the elements that contribute to successful design. Design which perhaps acknowledges the business, practical, and human drivers more than the cultural drivers. People buy products for what they do, but they buy brands for what it says about them. People tend to look beyond utility with brands to see what lies beneath, the backstory. You trade your money for something you think will make you happy. You buy into brands because you think they will deliver the lifestyle we think we want and thus delivers happiness. And logos are merely identifiers. They are symbols that allow us to recognize a brand and the values it holds. A symbol is an indicator of something else. It points to another meaning to see what values lie beneath. The power of symbols to convey much by minimal means has been central to the growth of knowledge. Cheryl Swanson talks about 3 pillars of a brand: the functional pillar, the sensorial pillar, and the emotional pillar. These are almost identical to Don Norman's 3 criteria of good design, but applied to brands. A brand transforms a product into values with a compelling story. It offers quintessential qualities for which the consumer believes that there is absolutely no substitute. Blind tastings of wine and of cola have proved again and again that it's not the taste, but the stories we buy into. Sports fans adopt their team because of the story, because it shows their loyalty, their sense of belonging, their shared stories, their emotional connections, and their affiliations. When my son Josh bought a Man United football shirt with Beckham's number on it, he thought he would be magically transformed into a different person, a person who could bend it like Beckham. New trainers can magically transform us into the fit young athlete that we always knew was hiding inside this body. A Porsche or a BMW will say something about who we think we are and about how others should view us. Brands are shorthand for our mutual values. These are the tribes that we belong to, and this is how we affiliate and differentiate ourselves, be it through markings, dance, language, social norms, trainers, watches, cars, hotels that we choose or can afford, and even the t-shirts that we wear. If we share the same symbols and stories, then it's clear that we have some affinity, that we have a sense of belonging. We are hardwired to construct stories which help us to understand the world and where we belong in it. What we consume says something about who we are. Convincing stories satisfy our mind's needs. The more convincing the story, the more we associate with it. But you have to look at the world's strongest brands and stories, religions, to realize that branding and storytelling are incredibly powerful tools. But our identities are no longer just one thing. There are many interconnected belongings and loyalties. Hotel brands rely on their assumptions and understandings of the guest's needs. Earlier I spoke about the object transforming the organism. Well, here it is again. Here is where, for better or for worse, the guest first meets the hotel, the hotel brand, and they conjoin. From initial vision to business plan to the guest to the results, desire and permission. There is often little difference between one hotel brand and another. Often pricing and quality aren't all that different. The difference is how it feels, how it functions, what stories it tells. Do we want to be part of it? Does it match my image of myself? The story makes us feel better about the purchase. We see transactions as part of our identity. Stories are how we give meaning to what happens. In order to design something, you have to first have a thought. And in order to have a thought, you have to know that you're having a thought. You have to have the thought and then be aware that you have the thought. And in order to create something of value for someone else, you must be able to have the thought, know that you're having the thought, be able to imagine that someone else will have a similar thought, and know that they are having a similar thought. Good designers picture in advance their end users' delight in the moment they experience a design. The process goes back to initial thought, a spark, a moment of association, and a moment of creativity. Design is creative, emotional, behavioral, and cultural intelligence. Designers accumulate and assimilate experiences and then refashion them into new patterns of experience. Market research can only tell you what's out there now, what needs or what gaps there are in the market, but design and imagination can leap into the future and take you anywhere. I think designers interpret and give voice to culture. Design changes the person who experiences it. Design is the business of emotional change. Creativity isn't a switch that can be flicked on and off. It's a way of seeing, engaging with and responding to the world around you. And in my opinion, to be human is to design. Thank you very much.